making apparel, which is a lot of what Patagonia does, maybe we can get to zero emissions or maybe close to it or close to no impact. But food should be able to be, better than no impact. Food should be able to make things actually better in the world. And Provisions, the food and beverage business of Patagonia, was founded on that idea.
After a little bit of a break, we are back with new episodes of the You Can't Eat Money podcast. We have an incredible lineup of guests this season, and we're starting off with the general manager of a company that has long been on my dream guest list since I started the podcast about a year ago, Patagonia Provisions. Paul Lightfoot is about a year into his gig as the general manager of the food arm of Patagonia and joins us to talk about a range of issues when it comes to ecologically responsible eating and food production. A good chunk of the conversation focuses on the launch at the end of June of Patagonia Provisions' latest beer, Kernza Lager. Kernza Lager is being launched with A Good Grain Collective, a coalition of 11 of America's best craft breweries, including heavy hitters Sierra Nevada, Allagash and Russian River, as well as a personal favorite of mine from my time in Los Angeles, Topa Topa. Each is creating their own unique expression using Kernza, a perennial grain that comes with a raft of climate crisis fighting benefits. There's some great links to the ongoing research in the show notes for those curious to dig deeper. But this episode has something for everyone. We talk about regenerative agriculture and specifically the regenerative organic certified Kernza that Patagonia Provisions is helping to create a market for. We also talk about how the business supports farmers and balancing a local connection to our food with a globalized food system. If you believe, as Patagonia Provisions does, that eating is activism, this episode is for you. As I mentioned in the episode, the Patagonia parent brand has a great campaign going on now to end bottom trawling in our oceans, which is destroying our ocean ecosystems and has severe impacts on our ocean food chain. I've included a link in the show notes to join me in signing the petition in support of the campaign. And if you enjoy the episode, please don't forget to give us a rating in your favorite podcast app. It really helps more people find the podcast and become more ecologically responsible eaters. Without further delay, here's the latest episode of the You Can't Eat Money podcast with Paul Lightfoot, General Manager of Patagonia Provisions. Today on the You Can't Eat Money podcast, we have Paul Lightfoot, the GM of Patagonia Provisions. Thanks so much for joining us, Paul.
My pleasure, Rick. Thanks.
So I want to start with a really amazing little video that I saw through the Provisions social media channels now on YouTube. It's about this idea of eating as activism. As the general manager of a business, which is a for-profit business, how does that inform your leadership approach in terms of delivering that idea of eating as activism?
Well, we have to start with the mission of Patagonia, the whole company, right? And the mission of Patagonia is to save our home planet. It's a super simple, but also super important mission. And when we think about that, food is, I believe, the most important lever that Patagonia can pull toward the fulfillment of that mission. Making apparel, which is a lot of what Patagonia does, maybe we can get to zero emissions or maybe close to it or close to no impact. But food should be able to be, better than no impact. Food should be able to make things actually better in the world. And Provisions, the food and beverage business of Patagonia, was founded on that idea. And this idea includes the sense that today the food system is bad for the planet, but also today the food system has the potential to be great for the planet. So if maybe a quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are from the food and ag system, we want to convert that to food grown in a way that draws carbon from the atmosphere, stores water in the ground, improves biodiversity, and of course it improves the health of the people who eat it, that kind of food. So when we think about people buying food, their purchases are either making things better or worse, depending on how it's sourced and produced. And this idea, back to the direct question you asked, is really informing all of our decisions here at the food business of Patagonia. It's the why behind our jobs. And we also, because Patagonia is a storytelling organization, we want to tell stories with our food so that people understand how their choices matter. And that gets us to this campaign of eating as activism.
This isn't your first job in food, right? I think you had another company called Bright Farms before this.
Yeah.
And what was Bright Farms about?
Yeah, we were trying to bring salads to consumers that were produced more responsibly as well. It's really I think probably the country's first commercially scaled local produce business.
And so you know a little bit about sort of shifting the category, I guess.
Yeah.
How does Patagonia Provisions think about changing food rather than like the traditional food system changing Patagonia Provisions? Like, what is that balance between working in the system and also trying to change the system?
Well, one of the fun things about Patagonia is that you're not asked to be politically correct. So I think about the rest of the food industry, which is, almost all of the food industry, almost all of American and Western food. In many ways, it's sort of our enemy. And I'll sort of break it down as like, I'll start with the fact that the Midwest is really the best soil and productive farming region that we have in the United States. And almost all of it is being used to produce ethanol and feedlot cattle grain, and a little bit for ultra processed foods. And all of that is like chemical farming done in an extractive way that's destroying the soil, destroying the water, resulting in the climate crisis. And I'll sort of add to that where most of the U.S. seafood is coming from. It's like net pen salmon farms. And if I sort of think about those handful of sources, that's most of what America eats. And that's the industry that we're competing with. And that industry, we think, is a catastrophe for humankind, right? When I think about our relationship to the rest of the industry, we want to take market share away from them. We want to get people to shift their food purchasing from extractively produced foods to regeneratively produced foods. And if we do that, if responsibly produced food can steal market share from the rest of the industry, which is not producing food responsibly, then hopefully those other producers will feel compelled to produce food more responsibly. They'll feel the sting of losing market share. And if not, well, at least we're taking away the market share. We're converting farmland, right? And when we find other good actors in the industry that are doing things responsibly, we're amazingly friendly. We share all of our intellectual property. We're very, very collaborative with other companies. We'll help them along the way. But I don't spend a lot of time worried about the risk of being changed by the rest of the industry. I'm not worried about becoming more like them. I don't admire them. Honestly, they can fuck off.
You mentioned a key term there that I want to just touch on quickly: regenerative. So there's been a lot of food companies and we've had some companies on the podcast in the past that engage in regenerative agriculture. Maybe it's just a good refresher if you can give an overview of regenerative agriculture, how that applies to like the Patagonia Provisions food lineup now and potentially in the future.
Yeah, so regenerative is a concept that's largely based on understanding that a set of agricultural practices can make things better ecologically, environmentally, rather than worse, right? And a lot of people talk about it in the most common types of farming, like in the growing of grain. Like we produce wheat in the Pacific Northwest regeneratively. And it's generally a series of practices such as there's no tilling, there's no use of chemical inputs. In many cases, you're involving rotations of crops through fields over multiple years. You are using cover crops to keep the ground covered in the off season, but also to bring more nutrients to it. In many cases, you're involving the rotation of animal agriculture involved. And when you do all of this, you end up with a process that builds soil organic matter, which is great for lots of things, including the climate crisis, including water storage, including biodiversity. And we think that this is really going to be the key to saving the earth for humankind. And it also results in food that's better for the livelihood of farmers and better for the nutrition of the people that eat it. So it's at the heart of what we're trying to do at Patagonia, create branded foods with Patagonia's brand on it that's made regeneratively. And we think that if we can create markets for regenerative food, the industry will hopefully follow and will convert more farmland to regenerative.
So how does Patagonia Provisions work sort of directly with farmers in the process, or is there another way of going about that to make sure that more to the point of how you control that supply chain to make sure you're getting the right product in the packaging?
Yeah, so we think that it's sort of a fancy word, but the sort of the provenance of food sourcing is super important, right? So when people don't know where their food comes from, in many cases, they're buying sort of a race to the bottom commodity set of ingredients, right? If a food company is just buying the cheapest version of whatever it is, it's almost certain to be produced in a way that's not good for the planet, that's extractive rather than regenerative, right? So I think in every case, we know exactly where our food and ingredients are coming from. We do the hard work of doing the research on all of our ingredients, which now I should say is really hard, but it's the price you pay for responsibly produced foods. In many of the cases of our foods, we have to go directly to the farm and work with them directly. And we're happy to do the extra work because it's our value system. It's what we're here for. If you like, I'll give you a couple examples, right? Like we are making beer with regenerative organic certified Kernza. It's coming from a Minnesota farm called A-Frame Farms, run by a friend of mine named Lou. I didn't know him before we started sourcing with him, but I've fallen in love with the guy. He's maybe 10 years on this farm in rural Minnesota, doing things the right way. And we have a direct relationship with him because there aren't that many farms yet growing regenerative organic certified Kernza. We'll do anything we can to help farms convert to this sort of farming. In some cases, we provided support to nonprofits like the Land Institute, which would really help commercialize Kernza. In some cases, we'll provide forward contracts to farms that otherwise don't have markets for the things that we look for. And we judge our success partly on the degree that we help farmers farming responsibly thrive, because it is hard work to succeed as a farmer doing things the right way today in the United States. And we want to do everything we can to give them a chance to do well.
And you mentioned the Land Institute. What is Patagonia Provisions' relationship with the Land Institute? One, definitely want to talk about it in regards to this Kernza Lager, but also sort of more generally, because I know Kernza is being applied in a few different ways across the business.
So yeah, right now we're producing beer made with regenerative organic certified Kernza. We're about to release a line of pastas also made with regenerative organic certified Kernza. And the Land Institute is a nonprofit based in Salina, Kansas, that has decades of experience essentially creating perennial grains like Kernza, not just doing the breeding to get it to the point where it exists, but also getting it to the point where the yields are sufficient that it can be commercially interesting, right? Today, Kernza is still more expensive than other grains, which makes it difficult. It makes the beer a little bit more costly to make than we wish. But we think that creating demand and volume will help us bring the prices down. We began our relationship with the Land Institute, I believe, as a granting partner. Patagonia is a founding member of the 1% for the Planet movement. And we've just given a lot of grants to them over the year because we believe in regenerative agriculture and perennial grains. The relationship is still one where we give grants to them, but we're also now a commercial partner in that we're taking their grains, buying it from farms that they've supported and trained and helped. And now we're bringing these products to market. So they are an organization that we have a lot of affection for. We trust them and we're partnered with them.
On the specifics of this Kernza Lager launch, I know this isn't the first beer from Patagonia Provisions. I think I was telling some of your team how I used to live in New York, and when I was visiting in-laws in California back in 2016, when Long Root Ale came out, I made them stop at the grocery store on the way home from the airport so that I could get my hands on this product. I thought it was super cool. And you mentioned that Kernza is a perennial grain, and that's the key ingredient in this new lager that you're launching. What is a perennial grain? How does that make it different than the traditional elements that go into a beer?
Great question. And I think that people are used to using the words annuals and perennials when they go to their garden centers and plan their gardens or think about the plants that are around their homes, perhaps. But it hasn't been talked about that much in terms of their food. But it, of course, is there all the time, right? When you think about the plants that grow our food, some of them are perennials. They're there every year, and some of them have to be replanted every year, right? Perennial grains, which don't get replanted every year, they protect and build soil. They require fewer inputs, which reduces the operating cost to farmers. They've got a lot of potential to help us fight the climate crisis. And even something as simple as the fact that perennial grains will result in less field operations and farm equipment emissions, right? Because the soil doesn't need to be prepped, the seeds don't need to be planted in the second and the third year, and it doesn't require tillage. So it helps to build soil organic matter. It sort of disturbs the soil less. So for all of these reasons, we think that perennial grains and generally food produced from perennial plants is better for soil, is better for the earth, is better for fighting the climate crisis. But it's a relatively new concept for a lot of people. Even 3 years ago, the idea of sourcing perennial grains wasn't something that I thought about very clearly, but it's a very, very important distinction. And we're grateful to the Land Institute for dedicating themselves to it for for decades.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how some of these ingredients can help shift the conversation, because you've got something like Kernza, which, the brewing process tends to be quite water intensive. And if you think about it just in in that sort of individual piece of the process, I think people can get lost in it. But from what I understand about Kernza is that it's actually better at holding and storing water, so it needs less water to grow. So you're kind of addressing, in the case of beer, some of the water usage issues before the grain is even harvested in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So, and it's early days, so there's not that much data out there right now, but we can sort of understand logically that like a continuous ground cover, which is what perennial grains are, and a robust root system, and the Kernza's root systems are dramatically longer and deeper and more stable than annual grains. You can imagine that will make a more water efficient crop, right? There's less sort of surface runoff, which allows more sort of recharging of deep water. I don't think we have the data yet to say we know that for certain, but it seems obvious to us that when that data is there, it will be there. I should also say that we've partnered with 11 different breweries for the launch of this beer, which is itself pretty unusual. And we sort of made the decisions partly based on amazingly high quality beers. Quality has to come first for us. That's sort of the Patagonia way. And so the brewers that we're partnered with already make the best beers in the regions, but they also had to be values aligned with us, right? We weren't just going to work with someone who was commercially successful. They had to demonstrate a track record of alignment with our environmental impact mission. And that means that many of these brewers are leading the way in terms of water usage, right? And you mentioned the grain production water consumption, but there's also, of course, the brewing itself, right? And as an example, you can go to sierranevada.com/sustainability. It's just one example of the 11 brewers. Sierra Nevada, is maybe the biggest and most successful of the craft brewers in the United States, but they are also, and have been for a long time, stewards of water. The founder of the business, has long been supporting Western rivers, which help protect rivers, something that we care a lot about at Patagonia. You can even see, like in their North Carolina brewery, the amount of technology they've put in to capture and divert stormwater, to treat wastewater, to protect the environment around them. These are leading the way. And so we hope we're doing great in the farming part of this as well, but we also hope we're doing great in the production part of it.
What sort of process did Patagonia Provisions go through to say, like, this is the right type of brewery for us to partner with? Was there like site visits? Did you have to quiz them on their knowledge of water usage?
Well, we've got two members of our beer team, Patrick Horn and Fletcher Chenard, are just sort of experts in the beer industry, right? So we didn't start off with, let's do some Google searches, right? So they had deep relationships. Topa Topa opened around the corner from Patagonia's headquarters on Thompson Street, and the founder of Topa Topa, Jack Dyer, who runs Topa with his partner Casey, Jack told me once, he's like, my main goal when I started this was to have a huge customer base that's made up of Patagonia employees. So there's an amazing overlap of people at Topa Topa with Patagonia. And both of their two main facilities were once Patagonia buildings. Like, we follow us around in the way we use buildings. But I'd say that when we decided to really make this a commercial program, a collaborative of 11 brewers, we did have a pretty careful rubric, right? And it started with the two things I mentioned earlier. Do they make the highest quality beers, right? And here in the Bay Area, Russian River is our partner up here. And ask craft brewing aficionados anywhere in the country, and they know about Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger and STS. Like, they recognize that Vinny and Natalie run the best brewer in this region in terms of quality. So it started with quality first, because if quality is not there, it doesn't matter what your impact is. It doesn't matter what your social practices are. It won't be important to people in the marketplace. And then it had to be the alignment of values, particularly with respect to the environmental impact. And we sort of laid out this rubric, and we judged brewers by market, and each of the different breweries, has an exclusive relationship with us in that market. And that serves them and us well. They've got the knowledge and the relationships for the distribution in the markets, and they're doing the distribution for us. They know the grantees, because we're going to be making grants together to environmental nonprofits. So we needed their expertise in choosing the right grantees, and enables us to more successfully scale this program without the slow and expensive process of building a big organization, right? We don't chase growth at Patagonia for the sake of growth, but if we want to make a positive environmental impact, we have to have some scale. If it's just 50 of us sitting around drinking a really great impact product. It's not changing the world. So we wanted to be able to scale quickly. And we thought that this sort of a structure would enable us to do that. And then finally, these are good people. These Jack and Casey and Natalie and Vinny and Ken, like these are all really good people. And this site sort of structure lets us help good people do good work. And honestly, it's fun. Like these are really fun people to be with and we love them. And so we're having a nice time.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's starting sort of a tap room only situation and then going to be canned hopefully at some point.
So right now it launched 2 days ago in tap rooms across the country and with these 11 partners. Almost right away, some of them are shipping kegs to other food service facilities. I think we're going to be selling our Russian River Patagonia beer at Chez Panisse soon. Alice Waters' values aligned with us.
Amazing.
And at maybe a dozen other restaurants in the Bay Area. And then in the fall, most of them will start shipping cans as well.
One of the key elements here that you talked about is regenerative organic certified, and that you're working with a specific farm in Minnesota, I think you said, to get that product. What is regenerative organic certified and why is it really important?
So regenerative organic certified is the certification standard that's administered by the Regenerative Organic Alliance. And for the sake of everyone understanding all of the relationships here, Patagonia and Rodale and Dr. Bronner's really stood the Regenerative Organic Alliance up. We did the initial funding. We sort of fulfilled some of the initial board seats. I was put on the board of the ROA in December. And so the idea here is that to save humanity and by fighting the climate crisis, we need regenerative agriculture to replace extractive agriculture. For that to work, we need to pay farmers fairly to do the right thing. And in order to pay farmers fairly to do the right thing, we need to have really a signal for consumers buying food that this food is produced the right way. And to have a signal that can be trusted, it needs to have a standard, right? We are enemies of greenwashing, and we think that a standard is the key to avoid that. And I believe in the Regenerative Organic Certified Standard as the gold standard of this. It involves organic, first of all, regenerative practices, social welfare, animal welfare, and that label works and it's growing like crazy. And in many ways, I think this is what organic was decades ago. Rodale was also part of the movement of bringing organic to the market back then. But I think regenerative organic certified will be faster than organic was. And I think it will be bigger than organic has become. And that's because of the growing awareness among consumers about the climate crisis. So the awareness of the need for organic, if you went back to like the 1980s and 90s, was reasonably small. It was a niche part of the market. And today, I don't think the awareness about the climate crisis, the mass extinction crisis, these are not niche concepts anymore. They are becoming mainstream and well understood. And that will be the wave that propels regenerative organic to be faster and bigger.
And does it help that core Patagonia also is pushing regenerative organic through some of its cotton products that it's selling?
Well, yeah, we think it's the same thing, right? Cotton and wheat are both agricultural products that we use in Patagonia branded products. So yeah, we think about it the same thing and we work completely together on that.
I read in an interview from 2018, Yvon Chouinard said, supporting regenerative agriculture is the best thing Patagonia can do as a business to further this new mission around saving our home planet. Does that, as sort of the food arm, put a unique pressure on your side of the business to actually like make that happen, especially with you're sourcing from one farm for the beer, but like eventually it'll need to be many farms to really hopefully meet the demand?
Yeah, that's a fun question. So I mean, the answer has to be, yeah, like we do feel that pressure, and Yvon says the same thing privately that he says publicly. That is a man that does not have two versions of himself. He's the same person when you talk to him one-on-one or in a small group. So that pressure is real, and I'm happy to have it. I'll be honest. I'm here for the mission. I'm here for the sense of resolving a crisis. Right? If I can be totally honest, right? Like I go through life not feeling complacent or certain. Right? I'm not one of these people who knows that they're always right. I often worry that maybe I'm not doing a good enough job. Maybe I'm not doing enough fast enough, and I find that feeling to be somewhat useful. This is really important stuff, and we need to wake up early and work hard on it.
When we think about sort of the global food system, and I know Patagonia Provisions, especially through its what I imagine are the best-selling sort of tinned fish and shellfish products, because I see them on the shelves everywhere all over the US now. How do you think about that balance between a global food system and supporting farming and farmers in local areas and making sure people have that connection to their food?
Seafood is more challenging than almost all other parts of the food system because it's confusing and hard and dynamic to source very, very carefully, right? We think we should eat lower on the food chain. We should eat bait fish, not apex predators. We don't want to eat food. We don't want to be sourcing seafood that doesn't have a stable or rising population, although that can be different by different geographies, depending on where you are, and so on. We don't want to support trawling. We don't want to support bycatch. Seafood is really, really difficult. It is also our most successful business in terms of market share and maturity and stability. And it's something we're really proud of. I eat our anchovies and mackerel on salads for lunch several times a week. I served a bunch of it to guests last night. So we are sourcing that from Europe right now and selling mostly in the United States, a little bit in Japan. I think in the long run, I'd like to have more local sourcing. I think that it's good, not just for impact, but it's good culturally to have local sourcing and seasonal sourcing. So I think you're going to see more of that from us in the future. You sort of see that with, we partnered with a cracker business called Moonshot a few months ago, and soon it'll be rebranded at Whole Foods. Will be the first partner we work with there as Patagonia crackers. And it's coming from this ecosystem in the Pacific Northwest, so not far from us here in Northern California, where we've got two farms, Headland and Carbondale, that work with a mill called Cairn Springs, which amazingly Patagonia had already been an investor in. They do things the right way. And our co-packer up there, which is called Partners. And it's this tight little geographically clustered ecosystem of good actors that are helping us bring, reasonably locally sourced products to market. We'd like to do more and more things like that. We do think that the emotional connection people have to their food, which is super important to get them to understand that eating is activism, is more powerful if they understand where the food's coming from in relation to where they are.
One thing you mentioned there, I want to touch on. So I was really lucky a couple of weeks ago, as I live in London now, to go to the launch event in London for the new Oceans campaign, which is specifically about bottom trawling.
Yeah.
And there were two amazing videos, one from an organization called Carrymore in Wales, which I'm actually talking to tomorrow for the podcast, and then Sea Wilding in Scotland, which is trying to restore basically from the bottom up seagrass. So how, an issue like that, which is being driven, I think, from Patagonia, it was a Patagonia branded event, Patagonia branded videos, but obviously has a huge impact. I mean, it's about our food chain. It's about our aquaculture food chain.
Yeah.
How does Patagonia Provisions and the issues that it cares about as eating as activism interface with some of these larger issues that Patagonia is dealing with and trying to end, both from a health of natural and wild environments, but they definitely have a connection to the food system. So how does that work?
I mentioned earlier that net pen salmon farming is one of our clearly stated enemies in the world. And the UK, I think, large parts of its marine ecosystems have been devastated by that, right? The sort of technology practice came out of Norway, I believe, but I think Scotland's had some real challenges, and the wild salmon is a catastrophe, I believe, there. But trawling is as well, right? We think the practice of trawling is like super destructive and extractive to the oceans. It emits a lot of emissions, and it results in a lot of bycatch, right? So we think it's horrible, and we are trying to take market share from them with responsibly produced food. So we love this Oceans campaign. It's super important to us. We are, as you can imagine, 100% values aligned with that team that made that campaign. I did some skiing with a woman on that team recently. We don't use those materials in our marketing, though. That's part of the Patagonia way, is to not use our activism materials or our values storytelling in marketing, because we feel like it could distort our values and it could distort our storytelling. So those two things sort of live alongside. And our hope is that the people consuming the storytelling will be moved by it and will be shifted a little bit. And we hope that at the same time, the way that we're sourcing our food will also move people and shift them. But they do sort of run side by side without being directly connected, because we like to have that independence in our storytelling, which is, I know, a strange and different thing. Patagonia is a unique place. It's a weird place in wonderful ways. And that's one of the ways that we really stay true to our values, is we keep that independence.
thinking about the future of Patagonia Provisions, like you've got this great base of like the tinned fish that everyone loves, and I see it on every review list of like one of the best tinned fish products that you can possibly buy. You mentioned the Kernza pasta line. We've got the Kernza Lager now. What does the future of Patagonia Provisions look like? Like, what can people look forward to eating?
Well, I mentioned a moment ago that we don't believe in making decisions for the sake of revenue growth, right? Growth is never the goal, but impact is the goal, right? And so if we're a small business, we're one of the smallest businesses in Patagonia right now. So if we want to have a material environmental impact, we have to scale. So this is one of the parts of the organization that will grow a lot over the next few years. And it's going to grow by having really, really high quality products that also have sort of great environmental impact and help shift farmland and fisheries. You'll see us continue to grow in those four categories you mentioned: crackers, pasta, beer, and the seafood, of course, obviously our biggest business. But you're going to probably see us doing some real innovation in foods that people eat on the trail, outdoors, and also in pantry staples. I think you're going to see us making innovative, regeneratively produced soup mixes and beans and things like that. I would say that that'll probably be, our fifth and our sixth categories, and that'll take us a long way. There's a lot of market share for us to capture in those places.
Is there one category that you are very keen to address, but either you're going to address it or maybe it's too hard to address right now, but you just have identified it as the one that you really want to tackle?
Yeah, we actually think a little less like that than you might think. If I was looking at an analysis this morning from the woman on my team who heads up product development. She's actually thinking of sourcing, like almost imagine a list of ingredients that are produced in the way we want. And then she had a matrix of sort of where that ingredient could be used across our different products and categories. And I've actually never seen that sort of thinking before I got to Patagonia, but it's pretty common here. And so imagine the overlay of that, let's call them sort of hero ingredients that are produced regeneratively, with the product market fit, right? Understanding who our core customers are, who are people who care about health, taste, and the environment, who maybe are eating as activists. And when you overlay those two things together, that's the machinery that spits out what products will be next.
And as someone with a good amount of experience in the food industry, what advice would you have for an average eater to just eat in a more environmentally responsible way?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to give a specific suggestion. I think I'm going to say that they should do the work to understand where their food comes from. If they can find transparency in their food supply chains, they're likely to end up in better places for their health and for the environment. They're going to avoid ultra-processed foods, which frankly are resulting in the chronic diseases that kill more Americans than anything else. They're going to avoid, those enemies I described before, like net pen salmon farms and feedlot cattle, which are destroying the soil, contributing to the climate crisis and making them less healthy. So that's what I would ask people to do is learn where their food comes from. And I don't mean in a general sense. I mean, where did my beef come from? I don't eat a lot of beef, Rick. I served it last night and it came from Stemple Creek in West Marin because I trust Lauren, who runs that organization. It's an early regenerative beef producer. And I would never order beef at a restaurant if it didn't tell me exactly what farm it came from.
Yeah. Know your farmers. That's a reoccurring theme on the podcast, is get to know your farmers.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks for your work.
Thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to chat today. Really appreciate it. And hopefully I'm going to get a chance to head back to the States soon and get my hands on some of that Kernza Lager.
Awesome. Travel safely. Be good.